Hi.
We are live.
Okay.
Nation's capital.
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome
Hello.
to Facebook Live. Oh man, I usually quote. Why do I always forget the date? And you have to put it. Right. Today is Thursday, May 24th, the year of our Lord, 2018. And welcome to our weekly Facebook Live broadcast. We are Tony and Nicole Davis, your marriage and family relationship mentors. And for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, we tell you why we say this. We say this because we had to wait until we had the receipts before we started diving into this area. We live by the theory of application. We have a track record of doing exactly what we said. As our children were growing up, a lot of people were saying, man, you guys have such great children. You need to write some kind of parenting book. And we said we would do that, but we had to make sure that our children reached the age of majority before we started telling people what we did with our children and presenting it as theories and application that should work. We wanted to make sure that our children actually did what we told them and that they had some success in that area as well. So one of the things that we say is we like to focus on the how-tos of the acquired knowledge. We know that there's a lot of knowledge out there, and really there's no shortage of information, especially as we call this is the information age. Mm-hmm. But the thing that we see that there's a not a lot of, or is that a death, wealth? What's the word? Lack thereof. What's that word? I'm looking for it. Begins with a D. I can't remember it. But anyway, dearth. There's a dearth. That's the word. There's a dearth of application for application. So, and that's something that a lot of people struggle with, but that's something that we've been very successful at. So that's why we say we can do this now because we're qualified to do so. And every week what we do is we come on Facebook Live for about 30 minutes. But for this month, we've been going a little longer than that, almost twice as long as that. Even with that being said, we were attempting to do 30 minutes, but we were very unsuccessful hitting that mark. We were just bad, primarily because of Nicole always talking, making her points, start preaching and stuff.
Right. All me.
But we usually talk about one of the subjects from our books. We wrote a book series called the Done Right series. And because, like I said, with the parenting, the first book that we wrote in that series, and help me with this bit, because I always struggle trying to hold these up.
Okay.
First book we wrote was The Parenting Done Right is Hard Work, but it's Worth It. It's a 31-day guide to win the battle for your children. And then, of course,
you done?
I'm done with that one. The second book we wrote was Marriage Done Right is Hard Work. Man, you do a great job. I would always struggle with the angles and stuff. Marriage Done Right is Hard Work, but it's worth it. And that's a 31-day guide to put the fun, fire, and focus back into your marriage. We think fun and fire should be in everybody's marriage, not just a whole bunch of focus and boredom, right? You got to have a lot of fun.
Yes.
But then in order to make
had many years to practice.
26 plus, going on year 27. But then last but not least, from the Done Right series, we wrote the book Leadership Done Right is Hard Work, but it's Worth It. And this is not a book about barking out orders and bossing people around. That's actually about becoming a leader of the inside out, really working on yourself to becoming the kind of person that others will want to follow and really just deal with. So whether it's your spouse will really want to have a relationship with you and deal with you and listen to what you have to say. Your children, they would look at you as a credible person, but also those skills do apply, and you can take them into the workplace. And if you have leadership responsibilities in the workplace, it'll make you the kind of person that people really like working with and listening to, as opposed to them sitting around the water cooler talking about how they don't know how you got in this position and talking about how inept you are. But if you apply the things written therein, you will be a great leader and people will really like working with you. But last but not least, let me just tell you, all those books can be purchased on Amazon.com. Or you can find them by simply typing in our names, Tony and Nicole Davis, and those books will come out. Or you can type them in, of course, by their titles. You'll find the books there. But also, in addition to that, we participated in an anthology, which really kicked off the whole writing for us. And then, as we started writing, we said, let's go ahead and write the books that we wanted to talk about that were personal to us. But with the anthology, we wrote, we're co-authors with 30 or 31? 30 plus authors in the anthology Speak to the Mountains. And what we've been doing this month is talking to some of the authors from that book. So without further ado, Nicole, won't you talk about our guest that we have tonight, our co-author guest?
Yeah, so before we introduce our guest and allow Tracina to tell us a little bit about herself, I just wanted to explain a little bit why we're doing this. And for those who are joining us, thank you so much. Please share. This is going to be an extraordinary conversation about a topic that is very near and dear to us. So Tony and I, we've been married, as he said, 26 and a half years, and we have two adult sons. One is 24 and one is 20. And so when we came to Maryland, I'm originally from Ohio by way of the Navy. Met Tony, we got married. This is his hometown. We came here. When we started our family, we wanted to be in a neighborhood where the public schools were good. So we actually purchased our home based on the schools that were in the neighborhood. Well, much to our chagrin, when we got in the neighborhood and started getting involved in the schools, we realized that the schools were not properly equipped to educate our sons.
Well, hold on, even back that up a little more, because when we initially moved here, we stayed in an apartment for a little while. When we purchased our house, we moved into a neighborhood based on what we thought would be a great situation educationally, because remember, the schools weren't even built yet. The schools were forthcoming. There was a new elementary school that was going to be built. The middle school already existed, but there was going to be a new high school as well. And those schools didn't even exist when we initially moved here.
Well, Deer Park was here.
Yeah, but we thought we may do the whole new town thing.
Yeah, so we had a lot of choices, and all of the schools. One was a magnet school. If you guys have magnets in your particular states, one was a magnet school. It was supposed to be a specialized school for specific interests and educational focuses for the children. I can't even remember what it was at the time, but we thought it fit was the thing. And so once we got involved, and I was a substitute teacher at the time, I was doing that before we started having children. Even back in the military, I was a substitute teacher. And so I knew I was going to be involved in the schools, but we really wanted to be somewhere that would work for our children.
Excuse me one second. Keep talking. I'm going to come right back.
Okay. So what ended up happening, I was a stay-at-home mom. It was that important to me. I wanted to be around. I wanted to be involved. I wanted to be on the PTA. I wanted to participate in the field trips. I wanted to know the administration. I wanted the teachers to know me, and I wanted them to know that we cared about the educational process for our children. When our teachers were absent, I was the substitute teacher because I didn't want just anybody in the classroom with our son. So we took that extremely seriously. When the boys got to middle school and high school, Tony became very involved in the education process, especially in high school. He worked closely with the coaches because our son played college football, and he played lacrosse, and he wanted to be involved with the counselor as it pertained to preparing the kids for college. So education is extremely important to us. And while being in the school system and working with the PTA and being able to sit in the teacher's lounge as a substitute teacher, I was privy to a lot of information that really hurt my heart to know that this was the environment that I was hoping to educate our children. And because of it, we had to make a financial decision that we weren't quite prepared to make, and that was to put them in private school because we weren't, I don't think homeschooling wasn't a big thing back then. And so we had to make the decision to put them in private school. And we did so because we knew, and one of the things we always say is you get one chance to raise your children. And because we took that so seriously, we enrolled them in private school and in Christian private school to help shape the environment, to make sure that we were creating a place where we wouldn't be constantly dealing with a lot of tomfoolery and allow our children to be educated in a safe and nurturing environment. So that's just a little bit of background about us and why this topic of education is near and dear to our hearts, and family is also near and dear to our hearts. Our portion in the anthology is on family. And so without further ado, because we have a ton of questions and we want to make sure that we have ample time to get to them if possible, we're going to introduce our guest and allow Tracina to tell us as much as you want to about who you are, how you came to know about the 7 mountains, and your involvement in education. Without further ado.
All right. I appreciate you guys, and especially this opportunity to just continue to collaborate with the authors, because I think what we have placed in the book is very important for our work in the marketplace. And, I consider myself a marketplace minister. I have, walked with God for about 20 years. And I don't see where there's a separation between who I am as a follower of Christ and who I am in what I'm called to do out in the marketplace. And so, before I got into education, I was in law enforcement. My goal was to go to the FBI and be a special agent. And my husband and I ended up pregnant, and I decided, okay, I can't be traveling across the world, with the baby. I just decided, much like you said, that my family was most important. And so I knew, being a stay-at-home mom, that it was going to be at some point very important for me to choose a career that would allow me to go back into the workforce, but still be a mom first, first and foremost. And so those years that I was a stay-at-home mom, I found a lot of joy and really just excitement in being able to do that. But as life would have it, I ended up going through a divorce and had to go back to work, and decided it was best that I go into education. And when doors were open, it was, I guess, much like you said, it was heartbreaking for me. I remember when I first went back to work, and I was subbing in it was either pre-K or a kindergarten classroom. And on the lunch break, when I took those kiddos to lunch, I sat in that classroom and I cried. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want my kids in public school. It was difficult for me, because when you have put so much focus into making sure your kids are raised in the loving admonition of the Lord, you're making deposits in them that will help them to grow up with character and integrity. And then they're thrust into this kind of environment. I was afraid, that there would be some very difficult times for me as a parent, and then even for my children. Unfortunately, those things have been not just for me as a parent, but a concern for a lot of parents. So being in education, what I realized is that there's a lot of work to do. And the work that needs to be done, unfortunately, we think that it's the work of the education system, but it's not. And so when I first got a permanent position with the district, I was in ISS, and that's in school suspension. So, these are going to be our kiddos who have challenges, doing what they need to do in the classroom. And so when they come in, they're supposed to be quiet. We have specific rules for them to follow. And I noticed, just as, as a marketplace minister, I'm looking at the needs of these kids, because I see them coming in, and it would be the same students over and over and over. And I said, something's going on here. And what I realized is that these kids had a lot of needs that were not being met. And because I had been away from from working for a while, I didn't realize that, this is what was going on in our society, because I was in my little bubble as a stay-at-home mom raising my kiddos, and, life was, just kind of set apart for me. And what I began to do while I was in this particular position, I started making notes of what I was seeing, because then I would take those things into my time of prayer and say, okay, these are the things that I'm seeing that's going on with the kiddos. I realized that much of what we see when we see the videos that circulates through social media, and we hear about things, that happens in the school, is our kids are angry. And the reason they're angry is because there has been we all know it, a breakdown of the family unit. And when the family doesn't function the way that it's supposed to, people get hurt. And so the education system is allowing us, especially those who work in the system, a bird's eye view into what the state of our families are. And
Right.
so one of the concerns that I have, being a professional in the district, working in public education, is we're expecting the school district to do, or the school system to do, what the family should do. And that has hurt a lot of the trust that is supposed to happen between the home and the school, the communities, even with our politicians, because they feel like we're not doing our job. That's why the test scores and data is not reflecting what they think they should. And so I think big picture, when we look at what's really going on here, the education system isn't failing. I think the family structure not functioning as it should is has left some huge gaps in the lives of these kids and even other professional, other people who are in the profession. And we're dealing with the symptoms of a much bigger problem, but we say that it's the school system, and it's not. I mean, that's my opinion. I do not believe it, because and I'll just say it this way: I have two perspectives, that of a parent and that of a professional, because my oldest daughter is 20, she'll be 23 this year, and she was educated in public schools, and so was I. And then I work in the school system. I don't see the public education system as a failure. I really don't. What I see is that as stakeholders, we have failed to do what it is we need to do. And I just want to share with you guys what a stakeholder is, for those of you that may not be familiar with the term. And I'm going to read it for you so I can not mess it up. But in education, the term stakeholder typically refers to anyone who is invested in the welfare and success of a school and its students, including administrators, teachers, staff members, students, parents, and family. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but there is a huge number of people who would qualify as a stakeholder in education. And so what I am suggesting is, if we have seen a failure in public education, is it public education that has failed, or have we failed public education? Because teachers, administrators, those at the district level, they cannot do everything that is needed to make that school system function the way that it should. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the form and function of the family unit, we know there's mom and dad, and our culture, our society is a lot different. So it looks different now when it comes to the form, but the function is going to always remain the same. You have a father and a mother in a home that are bringing both of their perspectives in the parenting picture that allows a child to be reared with what they need to get from mom and what they need to get from dad. So when you look at the failure of the family, that means the kids aren't getting something that they need. And most of what I am seeing, especially when you have this fatherhood issue, and we know fathers bring a lot of structure and discipline to the home. Not to say that moms can't, because I'm a single mom, and I think I do a great job at it because I'm intentional about it, and I'm very purposeful in my role as a parent. But when you look at the fatherhood issue, the lack of fathers being in the life of their children, that whole character thing that we're missing with our kids, that discipline, where kids can govern their own behaviors at certain ages because they've been reared in a home that this is the expectation. Well, you take those kiddos and you plant them into a school, whether it's elementary, middle school, or high school, and they don't have that foundation in who they are as a person, then that is what we're dealing with. And so not only has other students have had problems, but you have administrators having problems and teachers having problems, because we have to operate within the guidelines of our professional responsibility. And so, when you come into that environment with kiddos who will quickly tell you, you're not my mom, you're not my dad, we have not only our job to do there, but then we have a responsibility to help those kiddos get to where it is they need to be. And so when I wrote my portion of the book, the chapter in the book, and it's titled Separation of Church and State, Bridging the Gap, we have a huge gap to fill when it comes to the life of our young people. because
before you go in, because you're ready to go in.
Okay. Okay.
Tell us how you learned of the 7 mountains, and how you have incorporated that into your Christian walk, because we're coming to realize that this is a term that's not familiar to many people. So how did you come to learn about 7 mountains?
And actually, before you even go to that, I want to back up a little more, because
Okay.
I know you're in the school system. Now, are you in the classroom today, or are you in administration?
I am in the classroom. I am a classroom teacher. I teach 7th grade. That's middle school.
Middle school, okay.
And it's very challenging. But when you have been called to do what you've been called to do, God gives you the grace to handle those areas where it's very challenging. So I have found.
We'll come back to that. I just want to give people a scope of where you are when you're talking.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
So classroom, middle school. Okay. And then the 7 mountains.
Okay. I have for a very long time followed some ministries online. I'm here in Texas. And just in my walk with God, there were some things that my spirit man was hungering after. So I was always a seeker. And I came across the 7 mountains some years ago. And it was a few years ago that I came across Apostle Sipach. And so I started following him on Facebook. And the church and the leadership that I sit under is Redemption Church. And it was out of South Carolina. And they've kind of gone through a transition, and now they're in the Bay Area in California. But he's also apostolic anointing. And one of the things that I realized for me personally, what God has called me to do, I believe that anointing that he has on my life is apostolic. And because there's some things that just kind of flows in my life, the whole wanting to be in the FBI, and didn't know I was kind of drawn to that law enforcement aspect, but that's part of it, and I'm learning that God will kind of cultivate you even in everyday life for what he's called you to do in ministry. And so when I found Apostle Sipach, it was just this refreshing place in my spirit, man, that said, "Oh, this is what I have been looking for," And so following him, and then the project started to be, posted on Facebook, and I said I really needed to be a part of that because, excuse me, and I think this was 2014 is when I went back to work and I started seeing all these things. So I had tons of these little, 3M notepads while I'm writing all these notes about these kiddos. The book itself really is everything that I was getting in that time that I was in the classroom, seeing the needs and thinking, I see what the problem is. It's not the school system. We have a failure in our communities, in our families, and in our faith-based areas to meet the needs of people. Because one of the things that we're having to do now, I had recently spoke at a school board meeting about the need for a social emotional learning program to be implemented in our district. And it was received well by the superintendent. But the reason we have to put these programs in place is because our kids lack these things when they come to the schools. They don't know how to relate well to others, because they're missing that component of a family structure that has modeled it for them. And because it isn't modeled in the home, here it is, you're in a public place with other people, and you have the expectations of how it is you're supposed to conduct yourself, and they don't have those tools. And I'm going to put on my teacher mommy hat right now. And it has grieved me in my heart that we have been so critical of our young people. We have, they should this, and the videos are posting, I would whoop them, and I'm thinking, y'all, you don't see it. And because many people don't come from that perspective, all they do is they see what the kiddos are doing. And there is a verse in Proverbs that says even a child is known by their ways. So yes, we can see that there are some things that are off. I was raised in a time where you just did not talk back to an adult. You know, you may have went to your room and said something behind their back, or, you know, uttered something, because I did that when I was a kid. But to stand up in an adult's face and tell them what you wanted them to know, we just didn't do that. But these kids today, they have no filter. They have no sense of honor or respect. And I am saying it's not their fault. It is not their fault. If you have elementary school kids, middle school kids, and even high school kids who are just, you know, doing whatever they want, can we really say that's their fault if they haven't had that structure in their home to say, okay, no, this is how you conduct yourself? And so we're going to have to come back to some things that unfortunately we've walked away from as the adults who should be making decisions for our kids, and making sure that we are modeling those things that they need to see, how we interact with one another, how we address some issues. And so the separation of church and state and bridging that gap really is a call to action for us to make sure that we are focused. Give me a minute. Making sure that we are focused on, you know, those foundational the things that are important in any society. You know, it's family, it's community, and church. You know, it fits into that community structure. And then when those things are intact, you have people that can go out in society and conduct themselves in the proper way. But we're so far away from that. And a lot of my time in intercession and prayer has just been, you know, God, we have forsaken your ways. You know, the way that you have expected us to lead our families and, you know, function with our families. We have walked away from a place where life would be good and safe for our young people, but it's no longer that way because the adults in their lives have not done what's necessary, you know, and we got to change that.
So, see, let me ask you this question. So, with all that being said, bringing it back to the school system, I'm going to direct page 83 in the feedback. On page 83, on the third paragraph.
Okay.
Here's the quote. It says, "For a very long time, we have heard that reform needs to happen in the public system." And then you said, "I believe that many of us would agree with that a change is needed." We just put the things in to get rid of the feedback.
Okay.
You want to just share it? I'm going to share it. Can you hear back? Okay. Oh, that's great. Okay, so it says, I'll just repeat it. So page 83, third paragraph said, "For a very long time now, we have heard that a reform needs to happen in the public education system. And I do believe that many of us would agree that a change is needed." So what does reform look like? And what are the major issues there?
I think reform for the public education system really comes in a few areas, but the most important area for those who, if you're going to look at it from a parent perspective, let's just address it there, because the big issue of education is, you know, millions of kids are sent to school every day. And parents need to know that their kids are going to be safe. They need to know that they're going to be educated. And one of the things I think parents are also concerned about is not just educated to get from 7th grade to 8th grade or from middle school to high school, but after their public education is finished and complete, will they be a productive citizen in society that has the ability to go into corporate America or private sector or nonprofit and really be able to thrive as an employee, or be educated to the point that they could build on that foundation and become not just an employee, but become an entrepreneur or be a leader in one of these corporations. And so the reform that I think is needed is the way that we have approached education. I know it looks a lot different than when I was in education. Some of the big problems, major problems in education is lack of trust between the communities, between the home and school partnership. And then, you know, here in Texas, we have a state exam that's called the STAR test. And you have a lot of people that do not like the STAR test. And it is an accountability measure that allows the TEA to see what a school is doing. You know, it's their accountability rating system. So, you know, if a school is failing, then they receive a certain rating. And all of this is based on the STAR test. You know, and so the state exams is another area where there's reform. We hear a lot here in Texas also about funding. You know, we've heard it recently that in recent years, I'll say it that way, you know, that they're cutting funding from education, which I don't agree with at all. And I'll share a quote that our state representative, when he spoke recently, here in a minute. But reform is, to me, it is not just about what is happening in the schools. Reform is about what we, the people, will do, the stakeholders that have a vested interest in the success of public education. So last summer, I spoke at a back to school rally. And one of the things that I encourage those who were in attendance to do is, instead of us looking out at everybody else, the politicians and, you know, the TEA, which is an education agency here in Texas, instead of us looking for them to make change, those who are stakeholders in education at even in, you know, the community level, the local level, we have to do something different. You hear a lot of negative talk about education. Well, the teachers aren't this and the teachers aren't that, you know, or the schools is this. We have to change what it is we're saying. I think from a professional perspective, I don't like to hear that, because I can tell you more times than not, you have people who are coming in every single day who are given their 100%, their all in education. Teachers, administrators, you know, those who drive the buses. You know, I'm going to share this with y'all. As a mom, I have sat and I've thought how just how big of a task it is. And we're small here in my district, my community in Nacogdoches. I'm in East Texas. And I know at my campus, we have like 700 students, and we have 2 middle schools. I think we have 6 or 7 elementaries, and then 1 high school. But when I think of the bus system and what it has to do, the transportation system, and getting these kids from home to school, and then at the end of the day, from school back to home, that is a huge undertaking. When you think of the ladies in the cafeteria who has to prepare all the meals for all the kids in the district, that is a huge undertaking. If we spend so much of our time criticizing those who work in education, we have failed. It's not that they are failing, because you don't hear a whole lot of, oh, well, you know, the kiddos didn't make it home today. You don't really hear those stories in large numbers. So when you hear any type of criticism, my first thought is, if you only knew what that looks like. And we're a small district. So you think about in these bigger districts where you have thousands of kiddos going to school every day and schools are getting the job done. That's just the safety component, you know, those logistics that have to happen every day. So the biggest thing for me in reform in education, and, you know, when I look at the piece that I wrote in the book, is it's the way we talk about it. It's the way we think about education. You know, when I think of the Constitution of the United States, it begins by saying we the people. And we have failed to realize that a lot of the work we need to see done in our communities, you know, in our home, all of that starts with us. And until we can, in our home and then branch out into our communities, be a we the people, a lot of our structures are not going to function right. You know, they won't properly give us what we expect, because are we giving to it? So that's the first thing I would say. The reform that needs to take place is how we see it, how we're talking about it. We need to change
So,
that.
so Tracy, so with that being said, what can the stakeholders and the school systems, how can they collaborate to bring about this reform?
So one of the things that we have a new leadership. We've just had a new superintendent come in. He's interim, and he has had a huddle time, which is pretty much a community forum, or it may be much like a town hall forum. But I think one of the things that we have to do is make sure that those gaps that exist between the home and the school partnership, especially the trust factor, because a lot of parents feel like teachers are defensive, and and for the most part we are, because we feel like if we do any little thing wrong, we're going to be accused or blamed for it, and that's kind of what we have to do. But one of the things the communities have to do with the schools is they have to come together at a table and sit down and have conversations about the areas that are missing. Now, remember, I said that the church is part of the community. So
Hold on, you're jumping you're jumping the gun. You're jumping the gun. That's a subsequent question. But with that being said, you talked about. I want to unpack a couple of things that you said. You talked
Okay.
about. You said from your perspective, the first thing we have to do is change the thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, and there's a big gap, and I guess we need to fill those gaps. And I'm assuming, and you said we need to have conversations. So,
Mm-hmm.
are you saying that those conversations are not taking place now? So, how do we get those conversations started, and what do we do to change the thinking?
Well, I think a lot of that is going to happen when we do come together and we are having these community town hall meetings. When you have,
Are you having those meetings in your community now?
we do, we do.
Okay.
I am part of a program here, organization here that has a mission of identifying and addressing the needs of the community. And one of the needs, I'm on the education committee, is we need to make sure that we are having this communication, this discussion between those who work at the school district and those in the community. And so having these town hall meetings allows for us to come together as a community. So when you bring in the community aspect, and that's going to be families, that's going to be businesses, business leaders, the church, when everybody's coming together and having these conversations. Okay, well, what's going on in the public schools in our neighborhood, in the community in which we live? What we're doing is identifying the needs. Once you then have you've identified those needs, the next thing you can do is, now we got to strategize. How are we going to meet these needs? We have expected that the school districts do, or the public school system meet the needs. The public school system has a function of educating your kiddos. And most of that education falls within those 4 core classes. It's going to be English language arts, math, science, and history or social studies. So that's basically our function. But now, as I said earlier, because there's a breakdown in the family, we're having to meet so many other needs. We have student populations that have special needs. And so the school system is being pulled in so many directions on the needs that it has to meet. If the communities don't come together, identify those needs, and then work together to address them, the public education system is going to continue to feel the burden of responsibility to make sure that they're meeting the needs. And I think what that does, it gives a real bad taste in the mouth of those, professionals who feel like, I'm doing all that I can, but yet I'm expected to do more. And I don't think in our communities we really have had those conversations.
Well, of course, you're going to be expected to do more, because I don't want any personal responsibility. So I want you to assume that responsibility for me, right?
Yep. Unfortunately, that is where we are. We have not just within our families, but even in the church. We could say in the church, parents don't really know how to be the spiritual foundational leaders in their home to build their children with a spiritual foundation. So we send them off to Sunday school and we expect the church to do everything to build them into this person who will follow Christ. But really, that should be done at home as a foundation. When they go to church, the church is simply reinforcing what it is they've already gotten at home. As a mother, I was my children's first teacher. You know, there were, when they were young, I did not just waste my time. I made sure they knew their ABCs before they got to school. I made sure they knew their numbers, their colors, you know. But and this is not at all a complaint or criticism on families. I think one of the things that we have to do is realize our society is in a totally different place than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so we have to look at how things have changed and how it has affected just our foundations. Because if we don't have a good foundation in anything, whether it's education, our families, even in the church, we won't have anything solid that when challenges do arise, that we're going to be able to stand. And much of the failure that we see in our community structures is because we have failures in our family structure. Because our families, as you know, the adults, we go out into our workplace, we send our kiddos out to the schools, and if we haven't functioned well in our families, that's gonna show up when we go to school. That's gonna show up when we're in the workplace, you know, with the way we interact with one another. So I really do think much of what we consider a failure of education is not a failure of education. It's a symptom. It's a symptom, but it's not the problem. And until we address the problem, we'll continue dealing with the symptoms. And I don't think we really have the time for that, because our kiddos are suffering. You know, they're not getting that foundation of the education they need. We have kids in middle school that are you know, reading at a second, third grade level. And that is.
So how did they get to middle school, Tracina, and reading at a second or third grade level? How did they get to the 6th, 7th, 8th grade?
Part of that, I would say, is where we need some reform. You know, we have what I think a lot of people would agree on is because we're pushing these state tests. And I don't want you guys to think that I'm against having state tests. I think they have their place. But I think because we have pushed so much for this accountability system for schools, we're now teaching to the test. We teach performance. As long as they can perform at this level and we can get this data, it's okay. But when you do that, the focus isn't on achievement. And a lot of these kids haven't achieved that level of, okay, I've met my mastery in 2nd grade. I'm okay to move on to 3rd grade. They're not. And because,
so let me ask.
Okay.
Now let me ask you this. I saw you. No, yeah. So you said we're teaching to the test. Has teaching to the test yield? And granted, obviously, I know there's obviously a breakdown because you have kids that, or as you call them, kiddos, in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade who are not on the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade reading level, and in some cases, you know, you could be in the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade and be on the 9th, 10th, or 11th grade reading level. But if you're in the 2nd or 3rd, you're obviously not there. But has teaching to the test even yielded the results we're seeking from the test by teaching to the test?
It hasn't. Unfortunately, it hasn't. You know, we have some major problems when it comes to, and I don't want to look at the data aspect, because what I think we have failed to do when we keep looking at making sure we have, you know, the information we're going to get from these data, these tests, is we forget the people. And so the students are feeling the pressure of having to take all these tests. And they have their place. You know, they definitely have their place. But one of the things that we have done is put so much focus in making sure we get the desired data from the tests that these students take, you know, week after week. that we have forgotten that we have kids that need to not just get from, as I said before, from 6th grade to 7th grade, but when they don't get what they need at each grade level, and unfortunately they're passed along, then they reach adulthood and they can't read. And I know a while back, I like football. We started hearing about some athletes that couldn't even read, had made it all the way
Yes.
to college. They were in professional sports, but yet they
Hmm.
could not read. And
Yes.
so I think the reason we have gotten to that place is we've put too much focus there and not on making sure that these kids have exactly what they need. You should be able to read, write, recognize your ABCs, one, two, threes in kindergarten. When you get to 1st grade, now we're completing sentences, but we failed to get that because we're rushed along, to make sure we get these, the state tests done and get the data. So, and much of that has to do with if you're getting the numbers, if you have qualified yourself with these, the data that they're looking for, then, a lot of that has to do with the funding,
Yes.
unfortunately. And so, when they're looking at, will you be given this amount or will you be given this amount? And, I don't know if how it is in other states, but
Mhm.
we have a huge issue of vouchers or, choice, and that's another issue, that we're faced with here in Texas. And people are concerned if we don't do what we need to do, if we don't get this, and we're not going to get the funding. And a lot of times that's what it seems like, that we're just kind of pushing along the kids so that they can give us what it is we need to keep our good standing with the state, with TEA, with the state where we get our funding from. But we're failing our kids. We are.
It all goes back to the money, and I can tell you, even in
Unfortunate.
another part of the book, you made mention of the fact that there were many teachers leaving the profession within the first 5 years, and I'm assuming some of those frustrations about even having to pass kids along or pass students along is probably very challenging, because I'm assuming when you go into this profession, your ideal is that, wow, I'm just going to enlighten all these minds, and
Yeah.
then you get into the profession and you see that the minds are not being enlightened. And so then you have all the bureaucracy that goes along with the administration, and then you have a lot of qualified teachers leaving the profession. So with
Yeah.
that being said, you have the systems, and you have the systems that aren't working, and we talked about the fact that we need reform there, and then you having qualified teachers leaving. What does that spell for our children 15, 20, 30 years down the line, when you have a lot of qualified teachers who are leaving the profession? And then I would even dare say that there'll be many who will look at the profession and say, you know what, I already understand. I know what it's about. My uncle left, my aunt left, my mother left, my whoever left, my best friend's mother left, and now I don't want to get into the profession. Do you think that may eventually provide a drought where we don't even have enough qualified teachers to teach out students?
Well, I know here in Texas, we went through that a few years back, and you could drive through the city. Before I moved to East Texas, I was in Houston, and you could drive, and see all of these billboards, be a teacher, find out
Wow.
how to become a teacher, because there was a shortage. For me as a parent looking to the future, it is scary. It is very scary to think that a large number of professionals are leaving the profession because of the systems and the structures. Yes, reform is needed. Yes, change is needed. And unfortunately, those cries aren't being heard, because year after year we keep doing the same thing. And you have teachers who are leaving, and it's not that they necessarily want to. We love getting up in the mornings. We get to spend time with these kids. We get to do what it is, like you said, enlighten them. We get to teach. We interact with them. Be a mentor. Be that person who is there for them. But yet, when you have all of this other stuff going on, that is why teachers at the end of the day are tired, and why when it's May and they can see summer break coming, they're like counting the days, because it is tough work. And it's not necessarily tough because of what is required if you just look at what teaching really should be. But it's tough because of all the added pressures that come in. And then it's extremely difficult when you have parents. Like I said, that trust level is not there, and parents are angry, kids are angry, everybody's angry. And unfortunately, all of that is pointed at the teacher, and it's like, I'm giving you guys all that I have and all that I am, and it's not good enough. And teachers leave, they and you can see the disappointment, and they feel like, oh my gosh, I'm failing because I'm leaving the profession. But the reality is, when you consider the work that is required to do and the respect and honor that teachers get, it's like, I can't keep giving you this and you're pushing me down, or you're, criticizing every little thing that I do. And I'm not saying, administrators don't get their fair share of, criticisms and stuff, but teachers work hand on hand with these kids every day. And so a lot of that comes from, just that breakdown in communication. And that's why I think it's so important for the communities to get together and have these conversations. One of the things, if I could, that I made some suggestions, some practical ways that the church can be involved in education. And the reason why I say the church, because one of the things that I looked at is, a teacher cannot make, I have 115 students on my roster, round about that. And
how many in the classroom at any individual time?
You about to make me really get in my feelings right about, because that's one of the other issues that I personally, and I know other teachers, but the numbers are large. And I have 2 of my classes right now that I have 30 kids in one classroom.
Well, I'm just going to tell you right now, just be thankful you're not in Baltimore City. I remember way back when I had like 45 in one of my classes.
Ooh, what?
Wow.
How?
Yes.
Here in Texas, there is not a class size limit in the education code. No class size limit, except for, I believe it's pre-K. They have a limit, I think it's of 20. But even when you think about pre-K kids, 3 and 4, even 20 is a lot for one teacher.
Right.
But there is no class size limit, and that is one of the things that I want to change. I teach science, and one of the science organizations said, for safety reasons, there should not be more than, I think it's 24 students in a class. So if I have 30 kids in a class, their not requirement, but their what word am I looking for? Their suggestion that more than 24 is a safety hazard. I have 6 more than I have in there. And of course, that's something that we have to think of. But when you have that many kids in a class, which is going to factor into their level of education and what they can actually get, one teacher cannot meet the educational needs of every student in that class with that many students. So that's something that I think should have some changes in the policy that we have here in Texas.
Okay, so you express your opinion, and I say, okay, duly noted, and then next year you'll have 30 kids again. So what?
Yeah, because and I know that the school district, their hands are tied, because here's what happens when you look at, okay, we have to lower the numbers in the classroom. The first thing is, do we even have more space in our facilities, in our building, to bring in another teacher and then have a separate class? So that's another issue that we're looking at. And then when you think about, okay, the next issue is, that means we have to hire another teacher. If we hire another teacher, that's more money that we have to spend out. And so these are the things that I know administrators and those at the district level have to consider. And so for us who do it every day, it's a challenge, and we rise to the challenge every day, because I don't hear, complaints. day in or day out about, these things. But that is one of the things that I definitely know needs to change. Of course, that's going to require more money being sent. Either the district would have to spend, or they would have to, request that from, the state for more funding. But I do think that that's one of the things that we definitely have to look at, because if we're looking at the overall picture of educating our kids, are we providing the best possible environment for them to even be successful? And when you have 30 kids in a class, my answer to that is no. And
No.
so we do
Okay.
need to change.
All right. So, and you were talking about the church being one of these stakeholders. So, how can the church help? What can
Okay.
the church do?
Now, when it comes to policy, a lot of that is just going to be strictly what we do from the district center. But when we talk about the day-to-day things that when you hear the headlines, in the news stories, that is where the church can have a great impact in what it is they do. And so some practical things that I believe the church can do to be involved in education is, I mentioned in the book on page 83 that 50.7 million students started school this school year. And then you have 3.2 million teachers who are going into the schools as well as the educators. So when you have that many people, we know that the business of the church is about people. And so those places where education cannot meet those needs that we have identified that needs to be met, like social emotional learning, the schools are always trying to find ways to bring in character education, to make sure these kids have good conflict resolution skills. Yes, we can have those programs in the school, but when you have to add that in, you know what that does? It takes away from math and reading and all that other stuff, because we're trying to split that time that we have in a school day to make sure we're meeting some of these other needs. So what the church can do is let me back up a little bit. So I was saying before, I have 115 students. We sometimes have gone out to families, when we've identified some issues with certain kiddos, and we'll go to their homes. We can't go to 150 kids' houses, but
Sure you can.
well, the expectation for teachers is always that you can do more.
Yeah.
But the reality is we have our own families, and we just cannot. I mean, I'm a single parent with 4 children, the oldest in high school, the youngest is in pre-K. And I'm an educator. So that's a whole lot for me to take on in the course of a day. And then when I get off work, maybe have to go make a home visit, or make parent phone calls at the end of the day, call parents about concerns or, successes. That's tough. So when you look at the church having a place in making education better, the church may represent, there may be 10 or 15 families in the church that comes from my campus or another campus. So you have a greater reach than just one teacher trying to do everything, or one campus of professionals trying to do it. So what I believe the church can do is start inviting teachers in and having conversations. Number one, we need to be praying. Always. We know with, the recent school shootings and everything that continues to happen when it comes to the safety of our kids, we have to have some conversations. That issue alone, for me, really speaks to not law, changes in the law, not changes with gun control, but it speaks to the heart issue. Because somewhere, some person in their heart and in their mind decided, I'm done. Life is over for me, and I don't care who I affect, who I hurt. This is the route that I'm going to take place. You cannot legislate heart issues. You cannot change gun control laws and think that's going to change the heart of a person or the mind of a person who decides this is what I'm going to do. And so when the church takes a more active role in saying, okay, we know that a lot of our families are in this community, they're hurting. Sometimes, let me back up a minute. The church may not know. That's unfortunate. The church may not know, because we've gotten real good in the church at showing up, but we don't open up. You know, we go through the roles of just doing church as usual, and families are going, they're hurting. I was one of those families. And so if we don't get to the place where the church can be this central figure in meeting those internal needs of people, we're going to keep seeing a lot of the stuff that we're seeing. So my hope is that pastors would see just how valuable the church is to the community. And when I say the community, I mean everybody. Just because somebody is not a member of your church does not mean you don't reach out to them to meet a need. So the churches should always go at the beginning of the school year. If you have a principal in your school or a teacher in your school, go to them and say, what can I do for you this year to help ease some of the things that we keep hearing about in our community? The first thing is conversation. You know, we have a place to meet. You know, open the church up so those who are professionals, you know, and not everybody is you know, of the same faith and will believe the same. But I think that's another thing that the church has to do. We have to be able to open up and say, hey, all Christ expected us to do was be his hands and feet. And so if we're not being his hands and feet in the community in which we are, we're failing in that aspect of just not even the religious, spiritual aspect of it, you know. And so I think we have to make a point in our churches to be more community minded and not member minded. Like, we're going to just make sure our members here are okay. And so any family that comes there, whether they're professional in the district, if there's kids, they're going to school. So the church has a responsibility to say, hey, how can we help ease those things that are going on? So pastors need to open up the communication there. The youth ministers need to have conversations with teachers. If you have teachers in your church, or if you have students in your church, the youth pastor should be making some connections, talking to them, saying, okay, what is it that you're seeing? We expect that of our coaches when they're playing sports. You know, we want, if the kid is acting up in school, we'll go to the coaches and say, hey, you know, he's not doing this, or can you be a mentor? But I think that's a responsibility of the church. I don't think we have utilized the church to the degree that it can have a real huge or make a huge difference in the hearts of people, you know, because that's what the issue is for a lot of what we are seeing that's going wrong. There's a lot of issues of the heart that need to be addressed in how parents relate to their kids, and then when the kids are sent to school, how the kids relate to others, and you know, and so the church can do that. And then some other things that the church can do is, you know, bring in I don't know, do you guys know who Tony Evans is?
Yes, we do.
Okay, Tony Evans. He has a program, it's called Adopt a School. And what they did was they adopted schools in their community. And with that Adopt a School program, they saw tangible results of differences in how these kids would behave when they were at school. You know, the men were brought in, because if we have a fatherhood issue, fathers not being in the picture, then of course you got to meet those needs. So when they brought fathers in or men in to just be mentors, to just talk to these kiddos, it made a difference. And so those are some things that you have to do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, as I said, a church or a spiritual or faith-based message. It's just meeting a need, the need of connection, you know, connection in the community, connection with your neighbor, connection with those people who can help fill that void in a person's life, whether it's, you know, the teacher who is struggling to get, you know, just to the place where she feel like, I can't keep doing this. You know, it's tough. It's my profession. but the encouragement, because when you are bombarded with, there's so much negativity about this not being done and this not being done, we have to see that there's a greater place for the church than just on Sunday, or midweek service. We need to be active in every aspect of life, especially where we can help meet the needs, because that's what Christ did. He met the needs of the people. And I don't think we've brought it down to a level where we can say this is just everyday life. It's not one big meeting or one big seminar, conference, or to get a lot of people to come, but the church should meet whatever needs that they have found in the community. And until they open their doors to, these issues of the schools that are in the community, we're going to continue to see this cycle, because we know the systems of this world will function the way they were designed to function. And we know that they are not set up to help people function the way God designed them to function. So I think the church bringing in at least an open door, and I know I keep saying this, but we've closed it off. If you're not a member of my church, we just kind of step back and, we don't have much to do with that. But I think that needs to change. I really think that our churches could have a greater effect on our communities if we just opened it up. And I think they're doing the work. I think, a lot of what the church and its mission, its biblical mission, I don't mean just whatever your church doctrine mission, but in its biblical mission, if we are the hands and feet of Christ, we can change a lot of the things that are affecting our communities. And instead of trying to reach all around and, go over to these other countries, let's start with our communities, because our communities are hurting, because families are hurting. And if we can meet those needs right in our community, then our reach out would be, I think, would be a little bit more, not so much as one person, like a pastor. You see them doing all this work. They can't do everything. But if you're making disciples, then when that person leaves their school, they've graduated and they go on to another state to be educated. That's a disciple that's been sent out into that area. Now their life can be instrumental in making a disciple somewhere else. And so the church has closed itself off and not met the needs of the people. And when you don't meet those heart needs of the people, then those kind of things, unfortunately, leads to negative stuff that occurs every day in school. That's tough. It's tough for us to handle. It's tough for families to handle. We've had parents say, I don't know what else to do. And they've just kind of thrown their hands up and given up. And if we're trying to, because we have social workers and counselors, if we're trying to meet all of those needs and educate, our kiddos, somewhere we got to say, wait a minute, we have to bring in some help. We have to bring in some reinforcement, because if we are trying to do everything, that's just like if you're really busy in life, you're doing every little thing that comes up, everything somebody asks you, something's going to fail. And I think that is probably one of the reasons why reform is needed in education, because we've tried to meet all the needs, our special needs students, whether it's a physical need or it's, an intellectual need that needs to be met. We're trying to do so much in the school system, and we fail to do the job that, we were originally set out to do. And so the church can come along and meet those needs. And I see a lot of good things in our community that makes me excited and, full of joy. But I think we really have to see the big picture of why this needs to be a greater push in our communities, to have conversations, to open up our churches where more families are represented and we can touch more lives, and then meet those needs of those heart issues where people are just kind of frustrated, and you see kids being disrespectful, and you see professionals not holding a standard of, ethics and even morality themselves. So, those are some of those areas where we can change.
Absolutely.
So, you've made a lot of great points, Jacina, and we could be talking about this until next week. My
Mhm.
mind, if you
Yeah.
could see the things that's happening upstairs for me,
And you can see the things she wrote on this paper.
that I'm thinking about. But I want to touch one specifically because
Okay.
we're really looking at an elephant. When we
Mhm.
talk about what the church can do, what the school system can do,
Stakeholders.
it's the stakeholders. It's an elephant.
That's right.
And because we're looking at it from the 40,000-foot view about what could happen, it's really
Right.
difficult to see how do you start.
Yeah.
And even when you say, okay, you start with the conversation, then it's okay, well, then how do we then implement
Mhm.
what we've talked about? And then now you implement, where's the oversight? Where's the accountability? Where are the resources? How do we
Mhm.
do
That's
this?
right.
And so, just like the church, the teachers are burdened, they have so much going on. You could say the same thing in the churches. You can say the same thing for the policymakers. They have so
Mhm.
many things that they're looking at. And it just kind of hit me as you were talking about it, because even when you look at the church, it's a resource thing. Tony Evans, he's heavily resourced. But when you look
Mhm.
at the smaller churches, and you're saying, reach out to the community, yet you're struggling, with
Yeah.
the people that you have in your own local church.
You
That's
have
Um,
true.
like 90 members,
Right. Trying to deal with that. But what can happen, because the church is representative of the community, it
Mhm.
would be lovely to see, and I've never seen this happen. So I know that it's something that churches could definitely do. If we start with an intake form,
Mhm.
just in our churches, to find out who do we have in the church,
That's right.
like really know those who labor among us,
That's right.
to know what the family makeup is. How many single parents do we have? How many teenagers do we have? How many are in the local schools that are in the community? How many go to public? How many are in private?
Right.
Just how many are homeschooled? If we just started with an intake form to find out who is in our midst, we can better make decisions about how to help those right there in our local church. And I can assure you, if those people feel help, because that's the whole Seven Mountains mandate.
Mhm.
I mean, this is exactly why Seven Mountains is so important. When you start caring about the
Mhm.
individuals right there they need, whether it's sports related or academically related or special needs, whatever it is.
Mhm.
But the churches don't care about the people who are right there sitting in the pews. So how can they then care for the community
That's right.
and help bridge the gap between the school system, the community, and the church?
That's right.
So if we can challenge the churches, and it can start, especially with something as important, this is an important topic for you to just ask pastors, can you do an intake form? When the
Mhm.
people come in, the same way you pass out that offering envelope, pass out this form and have everybody fill it out so we can see what we're working with in our local church, where school is related. We're not even getting into the other areas. It's just to see how we can meet the needs of parents and students in
Educational.
educationally in our churches. And
Right.
then as you find out the occupations of those who are there, you'll find out a lot of those teachers who are no longer teaching would love to help from a tutoring aspect, maybe, because they'll get the
Right.
fulfillment in that they've already decided to move
That's right.
on professionally. But if they can still that desire inside of them to help students, that still can be met if we tap into the needs, or if we tap into who we have amongst us who can help us in these areas, and you don't burden people who don't have a desire to do that,
That's right.
because now you're using the strengths of those who are in these various areas. And that's what Seven Mountains is.
That's right.
Really learning what the gifts, talents, abilities are of those around you, and then pushing them into those areas. And I just see this as being something that could be very advantageous without costing anything but
Mhm. That's
time
right.
and a conversation,
That's right.
and then helping people get the resources that they need. So that's what came to me
Yeah.
just as you were talking. It is really just a form.
Yeah.
and then you talk to the people, and then you match the people.
And I'm gonna tell you what you said as you were talking. I'm gonna tell you what reason what came to me when I said that's really a good idea what you're talking about. Because when you and then when as you start talking about even all those ex teachers who you know those who are no longer in the profession who may still have a desire. I mean, if you think about it, look at Miss Steppy. And Miss Steppy is one of my son's former middle school math teachers, but she left the profession when he was in middle school. But nevertheless, she remained his high school tutor his entire 4 years of high school. So she was a personal tutor to him and a lot of the other students.
Because yes, she loved to teach.
She loved to teach, and especially when they got to classes like calculus and things of that nature, they went to her for tutoring, and then she had really a full schedule. And so that's one thing. And then you start talking about things like the disrespect and some of those other challenges, and even classroom size. And then whether you go to a small church or you go to a mega church, even with that being said, if you're in that environment, I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, but I'm assuming that those problems of disrespect and things like that will be eradicated. And if not, it'll definitely be lessened, right? Because now you're in a different environment, and like I said, and regardless of how big the church is, you'll also have better control of the numbers. So you can really make an impact by dealing with a smaller group. So a smaller group, and then sending them out, and then they'll be then they'll have an impact in their respective areas. So that's what came to my mind there. But when you say we got to have an education, when you talk about it at masses, here's the thing that really came to my mind. I said, wow, that sounds so basic, but I don't really, and maybe I shouldn't be expressing all this doubt here, but the doubt that came to me was, I don't know if you can really practically have an education. I mean, I'm sorry, you can practically have a conversation, because if you think about it, and I'm sure in your environment, or I know definitely here in Baltimore City, Baltimore County area, if you were to try to have that kind of conversation, I don't know how you can really get past a lot of issues, because you would spend an inordinate amount of time with the stakeholders who aren't in the school system, blaming the school system, then the school system telling them, the other people that know you have a major responsibility here, and we're assuming a lot of your problems. So just getting beyond the finger pointing would probably take months before you can even start having a productive conversation. I would love to be wrong, but I don't think I am when it comes to things like that. So you waste a lot of time. But in these other kind of environments, you may be able to eradicate some of those issues and then really get down to some of the business at hand and really educating the children.
Yeah, because without facilitated dialogue, it doesn't move anywhere. You know, we keep talking with no change. And that's why now, you know, the whole issue with the shootings in the schools, you get attention for a few days.
Yep.
You may get a few rallies and meetings for a few days, and then everybody goes back to the way they've been, because we're talking from such not just emotion, but from a broad perspective. Nobody knows what to do with all of that information, and confused people do nothing. And that's exactly what you have. A bunch of people were talking, but nothing's being done. And
the reason I said emotion is because people are locked in with their various views, and they think that my view is the solution.
Right.
But if you listen to a lot of people, if you listen to their view, you say, well, doing it your way would not have prevented this.
And you're still blaming.
And you're still
we can't even get anywhere.
You're blaming everyone who doesn't have your view.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
That I think is so important for us to move away from the big picture and just get down to everyday life. Because let's take the school shooting incidents that we've had. Unfortunately, if you look at everyday life, and after the news stories come out, we always hear that this particular shooter, or person that went into the school, they had this issue, or they had this issue, or this is what their home life was about. That's everyday life. And because the everyday life needs of that person didn't get met, let's say, perhaps they were bullied in school, or they were angry from circumstances in their home, that's not a big picture issue. That's a everyday life issue. And when I said earlier that, the people are hurting, our students are hurt, I see it. I don't always jump to a conclusion that this is a disrespectful student. This is, a defiant student, I feel like if this is what they're showing me, something's going on. And I think when we miss those clues, especially teachers are with them, 8 hours a day. And, our classes are about an hour and 12 minutes. So, when we see that, my first impression is not always, oh, they just disrespectful, they're defiant. Something's going on that a child would definitely get to the point that they would exhibit those kind of things. And one of the things that I learned is that kids they're having to hold adult issues in their child mind with their child understanding, and they blow up a lot of times because they can't handle the pressure. And if we go ahead.
No, and if we take that scenario that you just gave, something is going on with the child. So you, as a teacher, a concerned teacher, you tell the guidance counselor. And the guidance counselor brings the child in, and they decide with the parent that, okay, he needs to see a therapist. Okay, he sees a therapist, and the therapist makes some notes and may say, yes, I see that this is a troubled youth. Well, because we don't want to label anybody anymore, and we don't want to offend anybody with the possibility that something could possibly be wrong with their child. A lot of times the school system, they're not going to separate the child or give them any special attention, especially if there's any pushback from the parent. And so the child is put right back into the community with all the other students, and we act like that whole episode never happened. And the overwhelmed teacher has to go back to focusing on the other children because you really don't have the bandwidth or the resources to give that child that special attention. And so we're still in a dysfunctional cycle that is still not meeting the needs of that child. And if the parent is overwhelmed or has other children at home, it's just what happens.
That's right.
And even with that being said, you guys brought up another point. I know you said we can go for we truly talking about this, and obviously we can't tonight. But I can just say, even from a teaching perspective, you say when you evaluate the children, you don't automatically just default to that they're disrespectful. And I know that the shootings get a lot of attention, but I can tell you, and like at least living here being Baltimore for me, a lot of times you talk about the day to day. There are a lot of children, and of course they're your students, who they may not have been shot, but I can tell you this: every single day that they walk to school and they walk from school, it's not a pleasant situation. It can be very scary. As a matter of fact, every time they walk through a certain block, they may have to wonder, am I going to have to fight when I go through this block on my way to school? Because the kids here who should be in school, they may be playing hooky. They may have already been kicked out of school. And now when I walk through this block, they may want to take my jacket. They may want to take my tennis shoes. And they may be packing. I don't know. Right. And that kid could really be in that environment. So while it may not show up as a shooting, they may have had to fight twice. They may have had a fight on Monday on the way home from school. And then they may have had to avoid an altercation on Thursday on the way to school, and you don't know that.
So that's not home. That's community.
That's community.
That's community.
And like I said, and it doesn't show up as a shooting, but I can tell you that definitely has an impact on that student when they get to your class, because you may be wondering why he's not paying attention. And I know that I'm just using boys as examples. I don't really know too many girls getting jumped on the way to school or way home from school, but nonetheless, I'm sure it could happen. Right?
Oh yes.
A lot of girls act out too. But that kid may not be paying attention in your science class because he's wondering, oh my goodness, what's going to happen when I walk home? Should I go this way or should I go take the long way? And that's something that could be going through that student's mind. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't show up as a shooting, but that kid is negatively impacted.
Or the bullying, as you've talked about, Tracina. So where do we go from here? What do we do, Tracina? What can be some initial steps, some baby steps?
From the educator mommy perspective.
I think a real good first step would be as a stakeholder. And you will have to identify yourself as a stakeholder, because many people will send their kids to school every day, but they don't want any responsibility to make sure that the outcome is better. And if it's not what they see, They're not going to point fingers at anybody else. They're going to say, hey, I can do something. Let me see what I can do. So the first thing I think as a stakeholder, we should all make a decision to do is say, what can I do? Because I will tell you, even with the things that we can classify as a failure in education, if we all commit to doing a little bit more than what we have been doing, we can change what it is we see. And so as a parent, that could be in the morning when your kids are headed off to school, you have a talk with them and say, hey, make sure you're respectful to your administrators and to your teachers. You know, if you have a problem with a student, this is what I do for my kids. And my kids were bullied. And, you know, it was a tough situation for me as a mom. But what I told them is, if you're having a problem with a student, go somewhere else in the classroom or go somewhere else on the playground, because they can't immediately leave that classroom or that environment. So you empower them as much as possible. Just go somewhere else in the classroom or the playground. If that child continues to give you a problem, then you go to the teacher. And then at that point, you're expecting that the teacher is going to do something about it. So that's, as a parent, you can do that. You can have conversations with your kiddos about what they should be doing when they leave your home and go to their school. And if you are encountering problems with, you know, your child not doing what they're supposed to do, don't quickly assume that everything your child tells you about that teacher or that principal is the truth. You know, listen to both sides and then come to a conclusion to say, okay, well, this is how we're going to handle it. You know, so it's on us. It is not on the school system. It is not on the state. It is not on the government. It really is. When we just come back down to everyday life, what can I do to make it better? As a parent, you need to make sure you're holding your kids to a certain expectation of what they should do when they get to that school every day. And, you know, if you're a professional in the school system, you have to understand that our society is different. And we have to see it from that perspective, that this kid is not going to come to me and be the perfect student who sits down and gives me exactly what I want and there's not a problem. So it's not just about making reform on these big grand levels. It starts with us. Just change what we're doing. Just change how we're responding. You know, and it really is simple. And I think the reason why it doesn't really catch on and it doesn't register is because it is simple. We have made this so difficult, and I promise you it is not. When you work in the environment, when you work with kids, it's simple. They have needs that are not being met. Until those needs are met, you're going to keep seeing the problem. In education, when there is a problem, until we meet those needs or make those changes, you're going to keep having the same problem. So the change is going to come when we do the simple, everyday things. I mean, it's almost like we don't know that this is just life. You know, we don't know that kids are going to have some. I love how my curriculum instructor says it. She said, even good kids make bad decisions. So in the course of a day, you may have a good kid or any kid make a bad choice. We should not be so quick to criticize them and label them as defiant and disrespectful and this and that. No, it could just mean something's going on with that kiddo and we need to give them some attention. I like to say it like this: behavior is a form of communication. If that kid's behavior is negative and is not what you expect, they're communicating something to you. You just have to find out what it is. And a lot of time, even in the home, you know, if your kids are behaving a certain way, their behavior is communicating something to you. Decide that you're going to look at it not from the behavior aspect, but let me see what's going on with my child, or let me see what's going on with my student. But the simple thing is, we just have to show up in everyday life and do the simple things and stop trying to, you know, make this. I think the reason why it's so hard is because the stakeholders have made it everybody else's responsibility and not decided, no, this is on me. I decide to do something different. As a parent, when my kids were bullied, I did not tell my kids, if they hit you, you hit them back. If they hit you, no. Because to me, what I know that does is it continues the problem. Yes, it hurts me as a parent that I can't empower my kid to take care of himself or herself in my absence. But I think for the when you're in public and for the sake of common good, you say, what is the best thing for me to do as a parent if my kids are encountering a problem? You empower them by making the choice to move around somewhere else. If it continues, you empower them by saying, I'm going to get help from an adult. And then you tell your teacher or whoever may be in there at the time. If that problem continues, make sure you come home and tell mom. Mom will go to the school and handle the problem. You don't get yourself involved. And too many times we hear where parents are encouraging kids to fight, so that again speaks to, as a stakeholder, if you're sending your child to school every day and you're encouraging them to not behave in a way that will allow them to be successful in the way they interact with others when they're at a public school, and to go to school and get their education, you have failed to do your job. Education didn't fail. You failed as the stakeholder. So the responsibility is on us to change what it is we don't like. If we go 5 years, let's say this, I'm going to call it a call to action. As a stakeholder, I need to change what I'm doing. And in 5 years, with us doing what we need to do in everyday life, if nothing changes, then we got to say, no, it maybe wasn't just us. Maybe there's something else. But I'm 100% sure and confident that as a stakeholder, whether you're a parent, whether you're a professional, whether you're a business leader in the community, whether you're a political figure, who is involved in the funding of public education, if we all approach it from the different aspect, quit looking at the problems and start looking at some solutions, we will see a difference in what it is we see in our families, what it is we see in our schools, what it is we see in our community. I think we have just, it makes me think about the scripture that says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? We have done so much to make our lives better. We get a new house, we get a new car, we're doing all these grand things, but our soul is hurting. The souls of men, the souls of, and if you're a mom and a dad and you're pushing to have all of these things to make your life better, your soul is void of the real need to be at peace and joy. And that's one of the things that we see. Our kids come to us. I mean, at 7 o'clock in the morning, they're ready to fight. And I'm like, how do you get up in the morning at 7 o'clock and you ready to fight? Or you ready to just go at it? That's because there's something internally that is off, is not right. And, and I think a lot of that is the deep wounds and the hurt. I have gone through some very difficult times, even while I was working. But I know that if I let myself live in that place where life was difficult, then I'm going to give that out. And that's what we see with our kids. That's what we see with some of our professionals. And that's why we're in the place that we are. It's not necessarily the structure that's wrong or the system that's wrong, but you have to look at, okay, let's not put it all on education, the system of it just yet. Let's see, what have we done that does not allow there to be the success that we need? Parents not argue, but
Oh, sorry about that.
Parents complained about kids having so much homework. So now we don't give homework, and our kiddos still are not getting what they need. I believe, as a parent, I'm going to speak as a parent, my kids need to come home and maybe spend some time reading, spend some time going over what they have learned in school. But if we don't reinforce what has been done in the 8-hour school day at home, then whatever they did in that day is lost if they don't continue to build on it. And so when we see some of those academic deficiencies, it's not always that the teachers are not teaching or they're not getting what they need. There's not a support system that helps it to continue to grow.
And you know what?
And
And speaking of that support system, and I think that brings us back to the chapter that you wrote in the book,
uh-huh,
which is the separation of church and state, bridging the
uh-huh,
gap. And one of the things, because we need to wrap up, but one of the things that I want to
okay,
really just reiterate is that the statement that you made earlier is that really the local church is a stakeholder,
it is.
and we want to encourage those local churches, those are local assemblies, to become cognizant of the fact that they are stakeholders, and even the individuals in those churches to realize that they're stakeholders. And I would even dare say that even people who don't have students in the school system, whether you've never had children or your children are grown and they're no longer in the school system, that you are still a stakeholder because you're in
That's
that community. So really just give some serious consideration and prayer to where you can contribute to make sure that that the school systems are healthy, because even if your children aren't in the schools and the school systems aren't healthy, that's going to still have an impact in your
right.
neighborhood. I'm just going to tell a brief story. I remember here in Maryland, we had this one county, and I think if you would look at some kind, whatever stats they used, or whatever system they used to measure this, I think this particular county is considered to have one of the best education systems in the country from a public perspective. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember a woman that I was talking to one time. She said that, yeah, we have people who don't even have children who go to school board meetings because they want to make sure that our school system stays great and that certain students don't get zoned here. So
Wow.
they took initiative to make sure that things were
Right.
done a certain way, that they would go to board meetings, right? Because
That's
they
right.
consider themselves to be stakeholders. So
That's
everyone is a
right.
stakeholder, and really just see where you can be an asset.
That's right.
You want to say anything in closing, babe?
Mm-mm.
Okay, well, in closing, I want to say, no, are you selling copies of this book on your website, anything like that, Tracina?
I haven't gotten it up on the website. Actually, what I have done is I've met with some pastors in my community, and I'm giving them the book.
Okay,
I'm having conversations with them about, some practical ways that they can open up their church, to meet the needs of the community. It was very receptive. It when I wrote this, it was not for the purpose of selling a book. It was for the purpose of empowering people to do the work that needed to be done. And so that's just been my goal, in making sure the message in here gets out so that others can say, oh, yeah. And I did talk to one pastor, and he said, at this very moment, we are actually talking on the seven mountains.
that's
Um,
fantastic.
I mean, it was like, wow, that's amazing. And so that's just my focus. My focus right now is empowering people to do the work that needs to be done.
Okay,
Not selling a book, but empowering people, and I don't have the book available on my website. People have purchased, locally. But that's just where it is for
okay.
me.
Well, for those who want the book and you're not able to get a free copy from Tracina, you can definitely get a copy from our
You can,
website.
you
Go
you
to
definitely can.
empower2engage.com, and you can order it there, and also um, I lost my train of thought. Also, just like I said, I want to reiterate the fact that regardless of who you are and where you are in your life, that you are a stakeholder, especially when it comes to
Yes.
our
Yep.
educational system, and even more narrowly, the separation of church and state, and bridging that gap there, and realizing
That's right.
that you can make a positive impact. With that
That's
being
right.
said, I'll let you have the last word, and then we
Yes,
will
and
close out.
we'll keep up with you, Tristina, because we're interested in knowing the impact that you're able to make. Because, like we said, education is really important, and if you're able to bridge the gap between education and the church by working with the local pastors to get them
Yes,
involved, that is huge. And so we
it
want to
is.
be able to support that and talk about that. As you're making progress, let us know, and let's continue to have the conversation together.
I sure will. Thank you guys
Okay.
for having me tonight.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated it.
Any final words in closing?
No. I think we said everything that needs to be
Okay.
said. And as I said, it really is a call to action. I hope something I said sparked an idea, or just a desire to say, okay, let me do something different. Let me do the work that's needed to help meet the needs in this particular area of the Seven Mountains.
Yes, and I think you did.
Oh, well,
So
good.
we'll see.
Good.
We'll see what the feedback is. What you say, babe?
I agree.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tristina. That closes out our evening, and you have a wonderful rest of the week and enjoy your holiday weekend.
All righty, guys. Blessings and encouragement.
Okay.
Likewise.
Thank
Good
you.
All
night.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.